It's officially pumpkin season, and today I'm going to show you the easiest way to cook a pumpkin. In this video, we are going to cover how to pick a good pumpkin, 2 different ways to roast a pumpkin, and how to make homemade pumpkin puree. To get started, let's talk about how to pick a good pumpkin. If you want a pumpkin that you can bake with, you'll want to choose a sugar pumpkin, which is also sometimes called a pie pumpkin. This is not to be confused with a carving pumpkin, which is much larger but not very flavorful on the inside. When choosing a pie pumpkin, look for one that feels heavy and has a firm skin with no soft spots on the outside or on the bottom. You should also make sure it has at least 1 inch of stem, and just like you're shopping for a watermelon, you can knock on a pumpkin to hear if it sounds hollow inside, which is a sign that it is ripe. Now let's talk about how to cook a pumpkin. The easiest way to cook a pumpkin is to roast it whole. This means you don't have to cut through the tough outer shell at all. Instead, you'll just pierce it with a sharp knife a few times to allow for venting, then place the pumpkin on a rimmed baking sheet. You may need to lower your oven shelf so the pumpkin stem won't run into the top of your oven. Then cook the whole pumpkin at 400 degrees until it's tender, about 1 hour for a 3-pound pumpkin. You'll know it's done when the shell looks darker and is easily pierced with a fork. Carefully cut the pumpkin in half, which is very easy to do now that it's so tender, but it will be very hot. When the pumpkin halves are cool enough to handle, you can scoop out the seeds and save those for later if you want to roast them, and then the cooked pumpkin is ready to use. The other way to cook a pumpkin is to cut it in half first, which will give you a more caramelized flavor and shave off some of the cooking time. You can cut a pumpkin in half lengthwise by the stem or crosswise through the hollow part of the shell. I think it's usually easiest to cut through the hollow part, but that will vary based on the shape of your pumpkin. If you decide to cut it lengthwise, I usually cut to one side of the stem, and it doesn't really matter if one side is slightly larger than the other. Use a spoon to scoop out the center of the pumpkin and save the seeds to roast later for a healthy snack. Set the pumpkin halves down on a rimmed baking sheet and brush the insides with a little bit of olive oil to help keep them from browning too much. Arrange the pumpkin halves cut side down on the pan, then bake at 350 degrees for 45 minutes. Just like cooking a whole pumpkin, the shell will look darker when the pumpkin halves are done, and they should be easily pierced with a fork. Now that the pumpkin is cooked, you can use it to make homemade pumpkin puree. Use a spoon to scoop out the cooked pumpkin and add it to a food processor. Process it until it looks very smooth, and then it's ready to use in your favorite pumpkin recipes. I like to use it in a pumpkin spice latte, or oat flour pumpkin bread, or in my favorite flourless pumpkin bars. You can store homemade pumpkin puree in an airtight container in the fridge for up to 1 week, or you can freeze it for up to 6 months. I hope this roasted pumpkin tutorial has been helpful, and you can find even more pumpkin recipes to try over on my website, detoxinista.com.